So let's talk about dogs. Dodges? Doges? How do you pronounce this? You know, I don't know how you pronounce it. Now, this is an interesting name. Department of Government Efficiencies. I don't know what the S stands for. But really, this acronym was chosen as a kind of nod to Elon Musk's favorite cryptocurrency. It's even weird to call it a cryptocurrency. It kind of almost is an insult to all other cryptocurrencies. But the idea here is that you know, Elon Musk at one point endorsed dogs. It was a nothing currency. It was kind of launched as a joke. It's a very dodgy coin. Very good haul. Very dodgy coin. And but Elon Musk endorsed it. It went up through the roof. It then collapsed. It's been up and down depending on Musk's mood since then. And I guess he gave it another nod by calling this his new role in a new department in government after this coin. So this is quite I guess quite exciting. Ramaswamy and Elon Musk have an op-ed today in the Wall Street Journal, basically outlining their plan for how to cut government spending in dramatic fashion, and how to cut the government bureaucracy, and what they're going to do. So I thought we'd go over that because it is interesting. It is interesting, kind of the strategy. I now kind of get the strategy. And look, all ill views of the Trump administration aside, I mean, I really, really hope Musk and Ramaswamy are successful. I would love to see the government shrink, however much it can shrink. And if the shrinkage is by eliminating regulators and eliminating regulations, then it's a win-win-win-win-win. I mean, there's no downside to that. There's no losers to that. That is just all good. And it really does seem like that is what they are proposing. Musk and Ramaswamy are really proposing to do this. Now, this could be, maybe with the exception of the Energy Department, but maybe even more so because it could have more far-reaching effects. This could be the best cabinet, the best idea, governmental idea that Trump has had. But let's start with being real, right? We have to be real. And I think this op-ed by Elon Musk and Ramaswamy is the beginning of them being real. They're not going to cut $2 billion of government expenses. That's just not, it's just not there. It's nowhere near that. You can't do that without really digging into entitlements. They really have no intention of digging into entitlements, maybe with the exception of fraud, but fraud is not, there's no $2 trillion in fraud. So I don't know, did I say 2 billion or 2 trillion? I meant 2 trillion. So there's no, they're not going to do, they're not going to cut 2 trillion, which is what Elon Musk promised. That just is not happening. All right, an encoder error occurred while recording. That's fine. I don't, you know, if you don't want to record, you don't have to record as long as you stream. We're streaming. All right, we're streaming. Yeah, I need the new computer. Today's show, without any doubt, is proving the necessity of the new computer. Anyway, so what Elon Musk and Vivek really are trying to do is, I said billions, I meant trillions. So 2 trillion. They're not going to cut 2 trillion. There's just no way to do that, given defense, interest payment on the debt, and Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security, which Trump has said he won't touch. You can't cut $2 trillion without those. But what they're going to do is they're going to make, again, if they follow through and they're allowed to follow through and they can do it and they can execute and they can pull it off and the Supreme Court backs them up and this doesn't implode in their face and it could take a decade. What they could be doing is putting in place, real radical change in the way government runs. So let me lay it out for you in terms of what I think they are thinking right now, and based on their op-ed in the Wall Street Journal, and then I'll tell. We'll see how it plays out. But I've talked about this before, in this sense. Justice Gorsuch in the Supreme Court is a real opponent of the administrative state, and has made it kind of his goal, I think, his life goal as a justice of the Supreme Court, to do what he can to dismantle the administrative state. Now, what is the administrative state? The administrative state is all those regulatory agencies, all the alphabet soup agencies that are out there that regulate and control our lives, anywhere from the EPA, established under Nixon, to the SEC, established under FDR, to all the others. I mean, the FCC and all these things. And one of the great challenges, one of the things that's happened over the last few years, we talked about this when we talked about the Supreme Court decisions at the end of this last court's term, is that the courts have had this position called Chevron, which was a decision made in the 1980s, that if an agency, in deciding a dispute, err on the side of the agency. And generally, there's been this doctrine that it's okay for Congress to delegate to the agency the rules that it makes. And what we've seen as a consequence is an ever-expanding mandate for these agencies. They're created to do one thing, and then suddenly they're doing 75. And they argue all the 75 are related to the one thing, but Congress didn't explicitly tell them they could do the 75. I mean, probably the most egregious of these, but one nobody talks about, but probably the most egregious of these is Dodd-Frank. Dodd-Frank is an incredibly complicated, massive piece of legislation regulating banks. And what has happened with Dodd-Frank is the Congress basically said, we're going to create a shell. And they explicitly said this, we're going to create a shell. And we're going to let regulators fill the shell in. We're going to let the regulators fill out the details. We're not going to legislate the details. The details will be filled out by the Fed and the FDIC and the 5 different major regulatory agencies that regulate banks. So we're going to let all those figure this out, right? Figure this out. So that is, so the court has had 2 rulings, one an EPA ruling and one a Chevron ruling, to basically overturn this, to basically say, no. From now on, we are not going to accept an expanded mandate for these regulatory agencies. It's what Congress intended. Congress is the legislature. There's a separation of powers in the United States. And if Congress did not tell you you could do X, you cannot do X. And in deciding how to interpret the law and how to interpret what the regulatory agency is doing, we're not going to rely on experts. Courts are going to have make those decisions. Courts, it's their job to interpret legislation and to figure out what legislation is meant and to figure out whether the agency is violating the legislation or not. So what you have here is the Supreme Court basically saying, we're going to hold regulatory agencies to a new standard. Basically, the standard is going to be what the legislators intended. Now, this is the first time since at least the 1980s that this has been done. And Congress is quite happy letting the regulators legislate because Congress is lazy or, afraid or troubled by different pressure groups, and they would rather not bother. Let the regulators do the hard work. Now comes Yaron and Vivek and say, what we're going to do is we're going to look at all the regulatory agencies and we're going to identify all the things that they do that is not in legislation. That's not in legislation. And then we are going to ask Trump to write an executive order stopping them from doing it. And then if we're sued, which they will be on every one of these, we are going to count on the Supreme Court ruling for us, for the government, because, for the legislative branch, because Gorsuch and the courts have already ruled generally in this direction. Now, this is unprecedented because one of the things I think the Supreme Court said in its decisions is that its decision would apply for all new things, that it wouldn't be backward looking because the justices recognized, and I know this is complicated, but life is complicated, guys. The justices recognized that if they went backwards to relitigate everything regulatory agencies are doing, that would upend the whole regulatory regime, which I would celebrate, but the justices will worry about because it was too revolutionary. Now Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy are basically going to force them to do exactly that. At least to make a decision and to rule on whether the executive, whether the president can wipe out certain regulations. So that is, if that's what they do, which the op-ed suggests that they're going to do, as I understand from reading it. I mean, and if they take it seriously, and if they don't play politics with it, and if they go all out and really do it, wow, it's a revolution. It really will revolutionize government. It will shrink the regulatory agencies dramatically. It will take these regulations off the book. They will have a court ruling that legitimizes it. Congress would have to literally write new laws in order to get this stuff back. So it couldn't be the case. See, first time around, what Trump did was, it's just that the heads of the departments they in a sense deregulated by fiat. But then the heads of departments could come back, as they did under Biden, and redo all those stuff. But if the courts rules that it's unconstitutional, that is, the very fact that the regulatory agency did this to begin with is unconstitutional, then the new administration that comes after Trump can't put them back in. I mean, if it works, and I'm not sure it will, but if it works, it's really brilliant. I mean, it's not as deep a revolution as I would want. And it's not a thought-out revolution because it won't go through what are the regulations that it makes sense to most get rid of, not from the perspective of cost, but from the perspective of functioning economy. But man, will it shrink the power of the regulatory agencies, the most evil agencies out there, and could be a huge, huge boon for the American economy. So that, I think, is the primary focus of Musk and Ramaswamy. And it's going to depend on the Supreme Court backing them up. But remember, remember that a lot of this is going to take time, because once they start doing it, this will go to the courts. And the courts take their time. And ultimately, this will be appealed. And it'll be appealed all the way up to the Supreme Court. And, you know, then they'll have to make a decision, and all of that could take years. So we're not going to see anything imminent. But if it goes, if it works, then this could have huge long-term consequences. And I said this when the Supreme Court reversed Chevron and reversed and did what it did with the EPA. This will hopefully put the Congress back in its role as legislature, a regulatory agency back in their role as branches of the executive, and with limited powers, very limited powers, limited by legislation. And this will kind of complete that revolution that I think Gorsuch is eager to do. The one, and so we'll see. Now, it's also going to be interesting to see which regulations they choose, how much politics they play with these regulations. That is, it could be, like if this was the vice president, right, then he's going to want to keep the regulations that he likes and just take out the regulations he doesn't like. Now, how much influence he has, whether Trump even cares, I don't think Trump cares much. Pretty amazing. Pretty amazing if they can pull it off. And I think would be really good. Would be really, really good. Trump said DOGE has a year and a half. They have a year and a half to make proposals. They can't do anything, right? So they can't implement anything. They can't put anything into actual operations. All they can do is make proposals. Trump's people are then going to have to write up a bunch of executive orders. And then they're going to have to write up executive orders saying, this agency can no longer pursue this regulation. And then the agencies will sue. And then the whole thing starts. So this is, as I said, a multi-year process where all you're going to get from DOGE is a list of recommendations, nothing more than that. They have no actual power. And it's not about transparency. If it's just about transparency, then it's a massive waste of time. Now, let's be clear. This will not do much, even if fully executed, to cut government spending. This will not do much to reduce the deficit or to shrink our debt. But this will do a huge amount, if it's done right, to liberate American business and to free them from the crazy regulatory regime that they function under right now. So there is real potential here. So I like the strategy. As I don't like it philosophically, right? It's the wrong strategy philosophically, because the right strategy is, to move to get rid of all these agencies. But you have to realize that these agencies, Congress is not going to eliminate them. Republicans don't have 60 votes in the Senate, but even if they did, Republicans don't want to eliminate them. And the advantage here is that, in the past, the burden was on the legislature to write deregulation bills. Now, and this is what the Supreme Court has done, the burden will shift to the legislature to write back in the regulations. And that's hard. And that's why they'll need 60 votes. That's why they need 60 votes. All right. So, no, he's not going to eliminate $2 trillion. That was fantasy from the beginning, from the first time he said it. But yes, they could do big things. Now, will they? Will Trump want it? Will Trump pass it? will Trump and Musk fight next month and this whole thing will fall apart? That I do not know. But, Vivek and Yaron are not idiots. And there is actually a strategy here. And it's a thought out strategy. I think they're overly optimistic. I think they're overly optimistic. But it's not a bad strategy in terms of dealing with the world in which we live and figuring out how to get around the barriers and how to make a dent in these regulations. Now, add to this some other things that they want to do, which I think are probably less effective. They're going to try to do things like force all government employees to come into work 5 days a week, like Amazon is doing with its employees. And so they are going to force them with the assumption that a big chunk of the employees will just quit rather than coming into the office. If they do that, they're going to have to face the unions, the government unions. Is Trump going to be willing to fire, government unions if they go on strike, like Ronald Reagan did with the controllers, air traffic controllers? I doubt. I don't know. Right? He ran as a pro-union guy. I think Musk and Ramaswamy are probably naive in terms of the other stuff that they think. In terms of cutting government spending, I think in every other respect, they're naive. And again, the numbers are not going to be big. They're not going to cut a lot of dollars. They also are going to fraud and they're going to go into the Defense Department and all these other departments, and they're going to fix the fraud and fix this and fix that. That is all hot air. That is all nonsense. I don't think that can be done. I do think this teaming up with the Supreme Court thing, which they don't really fully spell out in the op-ed because maybe they don't want to completely reveal their strategy, but I think I figured it out. That I find really interesting and am, mildly excited about it if they can pull it off. And if Trump will support it, which is probably won't happen. By the way, one of the things they want to do with each of these agencies is they want to use AI, we'll see how that works, to figure out which of the thousands of regulations that each one of these agencies has actually fits their mandate or doesn't. So that's interesting, right? Because if you actually had to go through all these, take forever, you couldn't get it done. So they want to go through, they want to use AI to do it, right? And then give Trump thousands of regulations to cut across the government and have him approve their elimination by executive order and then take it to courts. And so that'll be interesting. And then once these regulations are eliminated, then the next step could be, for example, to say, okay, well, now you have less to do, agency. Here's the number of people we want you to cut in order to do it. Musk thinks he can cut 80% or something like that. Probably not. But, start cutting employees. Again, you've got unions, you've got challenges, but that's what they want to do. They want to also create 7 packages, incentives for early retirement for employees. They want to force them into, again, coming into work all the time. They want to cut programs where Congress, basically, where the spending authorization is lapsed. Now, this is problematic because it includes, for example, the VA spending authority is lapsed. NASA spending authority is lapsed, and certain anti-poverty programs. I don't think these are programs Trump wants to cut. Anyway, they're gonna. Do you know that the Defense Department? It would be funny if it wasn't so unbelievably sad and pathetic. The Defense Department has failed its audit. In other words, the $800 billion that the Defense Department spends, they can't figure out where it went. Can't figure out where it went for the 7th year in a row. So, there's something like $6 trillion, I don't know, that they don't know what it is. They don't know how it was allocated exactly and who has it and what's going on. They failed the audit for 7 years in a row. You know the last organization that failed the audit over and over and over again? Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae. In the early 2000s, we got a great financial crisis not long after that. Pretty amazing that, it's not secret programs. You just all you need is a line item saying secret programs, $5 billion. I mean, that's not hard. When you fail an audit, you literally don't know where the money is. And that's corruption, mismanagement, corruption and mismanagement, and just awful systems, awful systems. But don't worry, this is what the Fox host of Fox and Friends has trained his entire career to fix. He knows how to fix this, 3 million employees, and how to fix a budget that cannot be audited and hasn't been audited properly for 7 years. The other thing we're going to see is, here's a question for you, right? If Congress approves certain budget items to spend, can the president unilaterally not spend the money? Just stop spending it. Now, I would think he can't, because that's Congress's job. His job is to spend it once Congress allocates it. But it looks like one of the things that Musk and Ramaswamy want is to challenge that in the Supreme Court and get a ruling over it. In 1974, the Supreme Court ruled that no, the president cannot stop funding things that Congress has approved. Ukraine aid, for example. And they want to challenge it. They want the Supreme Court to re-examine it. One wonders how much input they're getting from people like Gorsuch with their plan. Anyway, more serious than maybe what one would have expected.